Welcome to Tipsy Thursdays. I am your show host, Juanita Coley, the Contact Center Whisperer, the CEO and founder of Solid Rock Consulting. And this week, we are again having another conversation again. All year this year, we are going to be using WFM Go Beyond as a guide to do that. Go beyond. Go beyond what? The status quo. Go beyond doing what we've always done and expecting different results. Going beyond the tactics into pushing into strategy. Going beyond just doing things and going into immense leadership. That's going to be super important for us this year, okay? And so in our last episode, we talked about the core four, okay? What that is. We talked about core four being the foundation of workforce management. Core four being data, forecasting, scheduling, and intraday. And I gave you a story around why that's super important, that we understand that foundation and how it builds. Each principle builds upon each one and how it impacts the other. And so this week, we are going to be diving deep into the first pillar, which I call data. Okay, so if you have your book, WFM Go Beyond, turn with me to chapter I feel like a pastor, all right? Turn with me to chapter 2, which is data, pillar 1 data, which is on page 14, okay? And so it's super important that we understand data. I gave you the story around how this individual I was working with was complaining about the system, their workforce management solution, not giving them Saturday schedules. And so while he wanted me to just simply attack the schedule problem that he had, I had to go back to forecasting and I had to go back to data. And so I'm going to tell you what I'm typically looking for when I'm asking about the data pillar. So if you are in workforce management, whether you are in customer experience, you're a CX leader, you're an EX leader, data is going to be critical, because how do we build on something and how do we execute on a strategy when we don't understand our data sources? So that is the first thing that I'm typically looking for. Where is my data coming from? Is it coming from the ACD? Is it coming from a CRM tool? Is it coming from manual data entry? Like maybe it's back office work, or we're doing faxes, or we're doing emails, or we're processing claims. Where is this data coming from? What is what I like to call the point of truth? And so the very first thing that we need to understand when we're thinking about this data pillar, which is a foundation of workforce management, is one of the foundational pillars of workforce management. One of the very first things that we need to understand is where are sources? Where are data sources? In a time where AI is being pushed at the forefront of almost every leader, executive leader conversation, every CIO, every CTO, every CFO, every COO, every one of these leaders are asking about, okay, and they're being pressured and they are being mandated to come up with ways to implement AI into the business. How do we operate more effectively and efficiently? How do we implement and stay cutting edge with AI and technology, automation, all the different things? It's going to be critical as leaders, as WFM leaders, as CX leaders, as EX leaders. It is going to be critical that we understand data. Why is that critical? The reason it is critical is because how do we impact business outcomes but for we understand the data? Case in point, if we're thinking about, okay, I want to operate more efficiently, or I want to implement AI, what are you trying to implement AI on? For what data do you have as a baseline to measure what that business outcome is going to look like? So I was talking to a leader recently, and we were talking about, hey, I'm being asked to implement some AI and automation into the business, and really don't know where to start. And so we kind of talked about this. Hey, alleviate, assist, automate. All right. Alleviate, assist, automate. That's my A3 framework for when I'm thinking about AI. So we're leveraging AI to either alleviate interactions, right? So just peel them away altogether because AI can handle it. Right. So we're either alleviating, we're assisting our staff to be able to operate more effectively and efficiently, quicker, be able to handle more complex problems. right? So we're feeding and we're pushing them information so we can assist them with the job that they're doing, or we're automating a process together. So it's really important that when we think about our data and when we're thinking about alleviate, assist, and automate, that we're thinking about. And so as I had covered this conversation and this topic with him, I said, how much of your call volume is repeatable, predictable, and repeatable today? Right. So it's predictable. You know you're going to get it, and it's predictable. So as we looked at his data, you see where I'm going with this? As we begin to look at his data, we saw, oh, okay, 3%, I believe it was. I might be getting the number wrong, but it was a significant percent of the call volume was repeatable and predictable. And so, out of millions of calls, this was a big number, right? And so we said, okay, we can alleviate that call volume simply by doing X, Y, and Z. And so how did we get to that? How do we get to that business outcome? We got to that use case and that business outcome by looking at the data. We weren't just doing AI for AI's sake. We were doing AI for the sake of alleviating. So that's where it fell under, AI fell under, that business outcome fell under that pillar. But that came from looking at the data. So one of the very first things that we talk about in chapter 2 when we cover the data pillar is understanding your data sources. When you understand where your data is coming from, then you can better analyze, that's the next step, analyze that data. If I don't know, I have data that's coming from the ACD, your phone switch, I have data that's coming from a CRM tool, I have inputs that are coming, that are not, they're manual because maybe it's back office or whatever the case may be. If I don't understand those data sources, how can I effectively analyze the data? And if I can't analyze the data, then how do I create use cases for business outcomes? I can't. And so that's going to be critically important when we begin to think about data. That is why data is so important. We start with data always, first, and always. Say it with me. Data first and always. Data first, somebody type it in the chat, and always. All right, I feel like that's a little bop. Data first, data always. Data first, data always. Okay, so we start with data first, always. Why? Because even if the data suggests something that we know we want to go against, at least we have a base framework for what we made our rationale, our reasoning decision based off of. Like, hey, yeah, I know the data says that we're going to peak or spike here. However, because of what I know I'm going to deviate from that. However, some of y'all are deviating and you don't even know you're deviating because you don't know your data. And so that's going to be super important. So one of the common myths when it comes to data is thinking that, it's just, it is a recommendation, right? It's a suggestion that I look at my data, and it's not. It is a pillar. It is a foundation in any of your processes, whether we're talking about workforce management, whether we are talking about CX, implementing AI strategies, getting a better employee experience. Where is the data? If you deviate from that data, that's fine, right? I can respect that you made a choice to deviate because you're saying, hey, I looked at the data, I analyzed the data, and based on this logic and reasoning, I'm going to deviate. I'm going to about face. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to go this direction. But some of you are deviating and you don't even know that you're deviating. So one of the very first things that I think is super important, okay, is that we understand the data sources. So when you understand those data sources, okay, this is where my phone switch data comes from, and this is where my customer data comes from, and this is where this data comes from. Or, hey, I don't even have access to this data. That's another point that usually bubbles up when I have people start to really dig into their data. Is they're like, you know what? Now that you ask, I actually don't know where that data comes from. Yeah, that was a slow bleep. Sometimes I'm having a conversation with the organization. I'm asking them about their AHT, right? This is a common one. And I'll say, okay, how is your AHT factor? Is it talk time in ACW? Is it just talk time? What is it? You know? And they'll say, well, I think, excuse me, excuse me. You started with I think. That's a red flag. I'm already throwing a yellow flag, red flag on you, right? What do you mean you think? If you're looking at your data, you should know how your AHT is factored. Is this talk time in ACW? Is it just talk time? How is AHT factored? Because it's not, we should not assume that it is always talk time in ACW, or that it's only talk time. Why is that so important, Juanita? Why are you hammering on that? Well, I'm using that as an example because when I'm in organizations and we're talking about how our forecast is off or how the system, you know, we love to stick it to the system. Oh, the system isn't giving me a good forecast. Okay, well, it's going to look at, your forecast is going to look at really kind of some main variables, your historical volume, your historical AHT. Well, is your volume right? And is your AHT right? Where is that pulling from? Okay, now let's compare your volume that's in your tool to your volume that's coming through on your ACD switch. Are they the same? I think so. If you're looking at your data sources, you should know, oh, they deviate about 1-2 calls, but they're fairly close. Or, hey, this is drastically off. Like in the example I told you about in episode 1, when we were talking about the schedule example, and I was talking about how, yeah, we realized that it was in a skill map, and so their volume was, a lot of their volume that came in on Saturday was completely missing. Well, you would know that if you started with if you started with your data. If you started with your data, you would be saying, hey, my volume is way off. Or, hey, what I'm showing for AHT in my tool is something completely different than what I'm showing for AHT on my ACD, right? Or I'm pulling one of these lines. I'm only pulling talk time and I'm not pulling ACW. So the volume or the AHT that's coming into my tool is only talk time. It's not talk time in ACW, which is what we consider AHT, because here at our operations and organizations, we allow people to go into ACW and they can spend a lot of time in ACW. Now, in your operations and in your environment, if you don't allow agents to go into ACW because you have them wrap on the call, you see how understanding the environment, how that can completely pivot and change. Well, because I've been in organizations where they will say, hey, we don't include ACW into AHT because we don't allow agents to go into ACW because we require them to wrap on the call. So they go from one call to the next call. And so it would make sense why they are doing AHT on just talk time and not talk time in ACW. Whereas in other organizations, they may say, no, we allow agents to go into ACW because maybe we're in the healthcare industry and there are lots of notes, case notes that got to be entered, so forth and so on. So we want to look at and we want to evaluate talk time and ACW and make that a part of AHT. So understanding not only your data, but understanding when that data is skewed is going to be important. And that starts with understanding your data sources and then understanding if you're getting all of your data. Do you have access to the data? And now analyzing your data. So with data, we have a couple of processes. And again, if you're in the book, you understand that there are a couple of processes that we cover as far as data gathering. First is data collection. Okay. Are you collecting your data? Whether that is in your WFM tool, manually on Excel sheets or whatever, how are you collecting your data? So if you have a WFM solution, it is highly likely that you are ingesting data from your ACD or your CRM tools or your other homegrown tools, and you're ingesting them via API or some sort inside of your WFM solution. If you don't have a WFM solution, you're likely collecting them on spreadsheets, or either one is fine. I'm not here to tell you which one you need to do unless you want to get some consulting. Anyway, I digress. But data collection is the most important, or one of when we're thinking about the process of data collection is important. How are you collecting that data? Next is data accuracy and cleaning. How accurate is the data? Again, back to the point about AHT. Is it talk time and ACW? Is it just talk time? Is the data that's coming into your tool or on your spreadsheet, again, if it's manually collected because it's for a back office process or a manual process, like if you're doing claims or some kind of not phone channel, right? Like, so you have email, chat, or you're doing claims, faxes, different types of processes. Is that data, how it's collected, is it collected accurately? Who has said that this is the right way to collect this data, right? You got to have a point of truth. You got to have something that you point back to say, yep, we accept this business. We accept this as a business as the way we process this data point. Why is that important? Because I've been in organizations where you could ask the COO what the AHT was, or a VP of workforce what the AHT was, and you would get a completely different answer from what operations would tell you the AHT was. How are we in the same company and have two different AHTs for the same line of business? How is that possible? It's not. What has happened is we have not established a point of truth for how we identify AHT, right? So operations might be saying, yeah, AHT is talk time and after call work, whereas workforce management is saying, no, AHT is just talk time because you guys let them go right into the next call, or vice versa, right? And so you have to establish a point of truth so that when you're doing step 2, which is data accuracy and cleaning, you understand if it's accurate or not, if it's clean or not. Our third step is going to be data normalization. So we now need to move into normalizing our data. Okay. I gave this example in episode 1 of this season, right? Talking about how if you are in a business where you have high seasonality, like or variable, where your volume moves around a lot, right, from one week to the next, it would make sense that when you are looking at your historical data, when we move into forecasting, that we're using 1 week, right? Because from week to week, my volume changes. Your volume shifts. Your volume is very volatile. I was in a weather-based a utility company where during the it was up in Canada, and during the winter months, their volume shifted week to week. Like it was insane, right? Because the men had to go up on poles, and then they would have outages, power outages, and so that would spike call volume, so forth and so on. So when they were looking at doing forecasts and they were looking at their data, you would see huge peaks and valleys, shifts in volume week to week during those winter months. Not because something was happening with the agent population where they were, we were abandoning calls or not doing something different. It was because it was a utility company that had high volatility during the winter months. And so when I'm looking at my data and I see these high peaks and valleys, I understand, oh, this is normal for this season. Now, if I would see that during summer, I would say, okay, what's happening? Is this the same reason? So understanding and making sure that you're normalizing and cleaning your data is going to be super important, okay? And then also interpreting that data is going to be super important as well. Last but certainly not least, when we think about data, the last step that we want to make sure, or last thing, or one of the last things that I want to make sure that I cover with you, is reporting the data to stakeholders. Many times, and this is a big one, so I want you to really lean in. Many times as leaders, whether we're WFM leaders, CX leaders, EX leaders, it's a difference between reporting something for visibility's sake and reporting something because I actually need to action on it. So when we are collecting, because workforce management, I'm guilty because I'm this way. I can get lost in data. I got data for my data points, okay? But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that my leadership or stakeholders, depending on who the stakeholder is, needs to see it. So I need to understand and align what I'm looking at and move it from data to an insight. And so if it's merely data for me, because I'm tracking something, I'm trying to research something, or I'm trying to get more information on a thing, I'm just collecting my data. You never see a scientist, right? And I just thought of this right now, right? You never see a scientist when they are with their finished product, right? Their bar of soap, right? That they're going to present to the market, say, oh yeah, on the marketing campaign, say, oh yeah, these are all the pieces, this is all the formula that goes into the soap, right? They're not presenting you with that. The marketing team has packaged that up nicely. Dove has said, oh, you get beautiful skin, or skin so soft, or whatever the case may be. Why? Because the scientists, all the research and data that they went into that's not needed. What I need is a nice packaged thing that tells me what I'm to expect from this. Now, if I, as a consumer, want to dive deeper, right? Say I'm one of those people where, I'm like, hey, I really want to understand what's in this, then yeah, I turn it to the back and I look at the label and I see all the chemicals that's in it. And I say, okay, well, let me see how they put this in. I can do that. But when I'm marketing my bar of soap, right, I'm just saying that this is, get your skin so soft, skin so clean, skin so soft. And so it's a difference when we're thinking about this last step about reporting to stakeholders. We need to understand how to package the information so that it's digestible. So just because you've spent 11 million, a number my grandmother used to say, 11 million hours on research and putting different things together, does not mean that needs to be presented to the stakeholder. You need to present insights, not data. That's good. Somebody type that in the chat. You need to be able to present insights and not data. I used to have an old boss, shout out to Lisa Gillespie. I used to have an old boss who used to say to me, what's the so what? Right? Because I would die. Baby, my notes had notes. My data points had data points. You was not going to catch me slipping. Okay? I had information for days. And she would look at... she would look at my data and be like, what's the so what? Like, just, what's the so what? And she was very intelligent, so she knew what the so what was, right? But she was trying to help me grow in an area of how do I present this data to stakeholders that is digestible. And so one of the common challenges that we as WFM leaders or CX leaders, EX leaders have with when we're bridging WFM to CX or EX or business profitability, and where we're trying to tie workforce management and go beyond the tactics of just data to insights, is we don't know how to package that information and tie it into the so what. And so your tip for you today is to think through, work through, okay? So we're not just talking, okay, this year. We're talking and using WFM Go Beyond as a guide to go beyond the tactics and tie into our organization's CX, EX, business profitability goals. We're not just talking through it, though. We're working through it. So your homework from today's Tipsy Thursday is to think through, what are my various data sources? Okay. And how am I collecting data? Do I even have access to those data sources? Okay. Is the data accurate? How am I normalizing this data? And how am I turning this data into an insight? How am I reporting out on this data point to stakeholders? And do I need to? Is this something that I'm using merely for research purposes because I need it for me to do my job more effectively? Or do I need to report out on this? And so I hope that this episode was insightful and impactful to you. But most importantly, I hope it was transformative and help you shift from a tactic to transformation. Until next time, you already know what to do. Go be great and let's make impact. See you guys next time.